So the goal of this exercise is to convert a string to a new string where each character in the new string is an opening parenthesis. If that character appears only once in the original string, or a closing parenthesis if that character appears more than once in the original string. So they will go on and tell us to ignore capitalization when determining if a character is a duplicate or not. I.e., they're referring to if it's uppercase A, then uppercase A can also be equal to lowercase a in this case. Okay. So these are the examples that they give us and the expected outcomes. So these are the input strings and the expected outcomes, or the return strings that they expect. So if it is din or den, they expect all the characters, return characters, to be the same. That is in opening parentheses. Yeah, parenthesis. Yeah, but that's also a tongue twister for me. All right. So recede, which is, it's got instances of E appearing 3 times. So the character E appears 3 times in this word or this string, means that the return string ought to have characters that look like this. So all the E's are going to have the same closing parenthesis character mapped to them, and likewise all the other, so on for so forth. You can see there's an edge case here where the string contains an empty character. That character needs to be dealt with in the code that we're going to be doing. So that character is seen as an actual character. So we need to ensure that our code can run that correctly. So yeah, just ignore this for now. It's just the notes. If we really have any problems, we're gonna come back to this. I don't think so. So we're gonna open our main.js file where we're gonna be implementing the code. So in this main.js, I started off by writing this in there. So this is the prep method. It's very useful when you are trying to solve any coding challenges, especially when you are doing coding challenges during interviews. It helps a lot. So we're gonna be doing something similar, but this is extremely simplified, so it can get really complicated if you want it to be. But the whole purpose of prep is to simplify the requirements and the outcomes of the code, so to ensure that you fully understand the challenge and you fully understand what is expected of it. So we use something called the prep method, which is PREP. So PRP pretty much stands for parameters, return, example, and pseudocode. So how then do we go about it? So the first step is to determine the parameters. So the parameters in this case, based on our problem statement, is just going to be a string. So what types of parameters is a function taking? Yeah, so the parameter is essentially going to be a string. Yeah, so, or rather, the function is going to take an argument. Yeah, the function has parameters, but it takes in arguments. So the argument in itself is going to be a string. Yeah, so the parameters accepted by the method is a string. So then in that case, we go into the second step, which is the return. What is the expected return? The expected return is a string again. So you expect to convert a string into a new string. So that's according to the problem statement, we're returning another string, which is great. So there's pretty much nothing else we're returning besides the string. And then we need to showcase an example. So in this case, I just use prep, which is the string that we use as an example, and it needs to return something that looks like this. So just closing parenthesis, opening parenthesis, and another closing parenthesis. This is taking into consideration the last statement on our problem statement, that we should ignore capitalization. So essentially, the first P is equal to the last P character. Yeah, so once we have that, then we can go to our last step, which is writing out a pseudocode. And this is extremely important. It's a very important step. So just writing out the logic. How did you understand it? It shows how did you understand it, and it shows you if there is something lacking. So here I simplified it in this way. So we need, since we're working with characters, and characters are contained in a string, we need to split that string into separate characters. So one way to do that is to change the string into an array of characters. So this is what we do in the very first step in our pseudocode. We try to split that into an array of characters. The exact implementation, we're not worried about it at the moment. We just want the logic. What exactly do we want to do? This is what we want to do. Our to do is to split the string into separate characters. And then the next to do is to then map each character to either, and I don't know the spelling. What we need actually is to count how many times the character appears in the array. If it appears more than once, then we need to return the closing parenthesis. Else we're just gonna return the original parenthesis, rather the opening parenthesis, as it implies that that character only appears once in that array. So once we have that, we can then proceed and actually write out our code. What I'm gonna do here is gonna go back to Codewars and just copy this. It's essential when you're trying to submit your solutions that your function looks the same, like the function that is expected as a solution here. So normally you just copy exactly the way it is, and then I paste it here. Then that's our start. We have this function name and its parameter here. So it could be anything here, but it's word. In this case, it's written word. Doesn't matter really. So we need to split that parameter, or rather the argument that is passed into this method. So in this case, we need to create a new array called word. I'm just going to call it word again, by splitting the original string. So word dot split. So it's gonna, this method split takes in an argument of either an argument that essentially denotes how you want the string to be split. In this case, we just wanna split along the spaces in between, so rather in between the characters. So we're going to split in between the characters in this case, and we're going to return that split. And actually, before we proceed, let me actually demonstrate how this, just in case you may not be familiar with how this goes about. Let's just say we have a string of, again, let's just call it prep. We have that string. So if we just then proceed and say string dot split, and then we say we want to split it along the middle of each, in between the characters. This is our return. This is what is returned. an array that consists of characters. So each character is a separate element of the string of the array. So that's exactly what we're having here. We want to split this word or the string here into a new array that consists of characters as elements of that array. So once we have that, then we can proceed to then second part of our pseudocode, that is to map each of these characters to either an opening or closing parentheses. So here we want to create new word. So we're just going to call it const new word. Oh, blank. Const new word is equals to take this original array, which is word dot. Here we're going to be using array methods. I'm going to be using ES notation, ES6 notation as much as possible, yeah, where it's applicable. And one of the first place where I'm going to be using is here, which is using this map method. Inside the map method, I'm going to be using array functions. So we go ahead with the dot map method. If you, once again, you're not familiar with what dot map method is, if you're learning JavaScript, I would really encourage you to learn how these array methods work. They are very important. You use them a lot. There's a whole lot of implementation for them, and I would really encourage you to look through them and work on them. Every time when I'm not familiar with something, including these functions, these methods, I always have empty and open somewhere. So this is an example of it. Actually, I already have array.map open. So we just come through here and then search. I prefer MDN as my start point for searching for something. So it takes me straight to this, where it gives me a good example of how to use it, a basic example of how. If you still don't, let's just place this down. If you still don't understand it, then you can just go through the rest of the documentation, where it explains in detail what's actually going on with the method. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to be using. Essentially, I'm going to be using these array methods moving forward. So inside the array method, so if you have checked in the simplified example they gave us, you would have noticed that it gives you access to this, which is essentially an element of the array itself, the array that you're trying to map. But then in its entirety, the map function gives you this. Yeah, so it takes in these arguments here. The first one is an element, which refers to, in our example, each character of the element of the array. And then the index is the index of the array, which maps to each element. So whatever element has got an index, because remember, an array is a linked list, rather not, it's an ordered list. So as such, each element has got an index. The first element inside the array is going to have an index of 0. And then another argument that we have is an array. So it returns just the array, it takes in the array itself. So it has access to the array, it has access to the index, it has access to the element. So it's basically what we're going to be using as well in this case. So we want access to the element. In this case, we just going to need, I don't need the element in that case. we need access to the element, access to the index, and access to the array. These are the three things. Oh, I don't need array written that way, just meaning normal. And then once we have that, this is the function that we're going to use. We're going to be using arrow functions in this case. Open my braces like that. So what sort of logic are we going to write in here? What we're going to need in here is to check if this element appears more than once. Like we said here, we want to check if this element appears more than once in this word. So how are we going to go about that? We need to use conditionals. In this case, we're going to use an if statement. If, then, so how are we actually going to do this? We're going to use a so what we're going to use is we need to check how many times the element appears in this array. We're gonna go about doing this way. So yeah, guys, I'm thinking in real time, and yeah, so there's gonna be a little bit of delays here and there as I think of what and how to write it. So we need the array itself that we already have, and we need another array method here. We need to filter this array into, we need to return an array that only contains elements that are equal to, or characters rather, that are the same. So we need same characters to appear in this array. So we're going to be checking to see for each array, for each element. So once again, filter also has access to these arguments. So it's going to be element, index, and array. But in this instance, we don't need index, we don't need array. We only need the element. So we're just going to use this element, and as such, we don't need the parentheses at all. We're going to use this arrow function, and then we take the element. Oh, actually, instead of, let's call them lm, so to ensure that they don't conflict. So we know that lm is referring to elements inside this filtered array, whereas the mapped array has got the element, it's got this the element written as element. So we want to check if element is equal to the element from the mapped array. So if they are equal, so once again, this statement here retains a new array that contains characters, that contains the characters in how many times they appear. So only contains characters that look like each other, or that are the same, similar characters. So we want to check then, using the length property, how many there are. So we're going to check how many there are. So, and then still in our conditional, if the length, which is how many of these characters are, is greater than 1, and then it means that this character appears more than once. We need to return, if they say, we need to return the closing parenthesis bracket parenthesis. Else, if that's not the case, return the opening parenthesis. So we're going to come back to this. So so what did we exactly do here? So we want to create a new array that is mapped with where each character from the old array is mapped to either the opening parenthesis or the closing parenthesis. So we're going to use the map method, which is an array method, built-in array method that comes with JavaScript. This built-in array method gives us access to these three things, which is the element, the index, and the array. They're built in, so it uses these three things to do stuff. So for the interest of those that may not understand what array methods do, they're part of ES6, and what they essentially mean is use whatever on the left of this arrow function, of this arrow, to do stuff on the right of the arrow. So use the element, the index, and the array to do stuff on the right. That's essentially what it means. Normally we would have just written it as a function with the name and the parameters. So in this case, the parameters are these things that are being used to do whatever inside the function. So essentially the map method is a higher order function because it takes another function inside it. So if you've heard of higher order functions, a map is a higher order function, a filter is also a higher order function. It takes in another method inside it, or another function inside it. So essentially, so these are our parameters. In this case, we're only interested in the element in the array, but we have access to all three of them in this case. However, we're not going to use the index. So inside the map, this method here, inside the map method, we have a conditional. Inside the conditional statement says if the filtered array, the length of that filtered array is greater than 1, we need to return the closing parenthesis. What does this statement mean? What is the filtered array? The filtered array essentially contains all those characters that are equal to each other, that are the same essentially. So how are you doing it? We are doing it using the filter method, which we also said is a high order function, and it also takes the same parameters. It also has the same parameters as the map method, but in this case we're only interested in only one of those parameters, which is the element parameter. So to avoid conflict, we name them different things. We could have named it anything, doesn't matter, as long as they come in this, because this method assumes that whatever first parameter you have here is referring to the element. So we could have called it A, B, whatever other character here, and it would still work. So once again, we have an arrow function, which means that we use whatever is on the left to do stuff on the right. So what we want to do, we want to filter all those characters that are the same. So how do you go about it? We take the characters that we're getting from this array and we want to compare them to this character here from the main or from the mapped array. So if any of them are equal to this element, return the filtered array. Once we filter the array, we need to check the length. So the length property gives us the number of the items inside the array. This number of items inside the array is equivalent to the amount of times the character is duplicated inside the array, which also means how many times that character appears in the string. And we check in our conditional whether or not that length is greater than 1. If it is, it means that that character is appearing more than once. Therefore, return the closing parenthesis Otherwise, if it's not greater than 1, that character is only appearing once. Yeah, once, i.e. return in opening parentheses. So this is more or less what we need. This is what we're going to have, and this is what we're going to return. So we're going to return the new word is, this is what it said. We said we're going to return another string, which is a new word. So let's save this. Boom. Oh, so just in case you might wonder what just happened, I'm running Prettier extension inside VSCode. So if you may be wondering, yeah, that's what just happened. It just added a few, it made it look more, well, prettier. Yeah, so it's just cosmetic changes, nothing else different, nothing else changed, still the same. So let's just go and try to run this and see if it actually does anything and if it works. So let's see, what's the name of our function? Is duplicate encode. Let's get access to that. There it is. So we need to pass in a string. We're gonna pass in prep, and we want to see what is returned. So it returns this, so which is all of them, which is opening parentheses, and it doesn't look right. Something is wrong. Okay, so what is wrong here? If you might have figured out, we said in the problem statement that P uppercase is the same as P lowercase. They were supposed to be equal, but however we don't actually have that. It's saying, this result is saying all these letters, or rather characters, are only appearing once, and this is not correct. A problem statement makes clear that we need to ignore capitalization. We didn't do that. So yeah, according to this function, yeah, capital, or rather uppercase letters, uppercase characters are different to lowercase characters. So we need to take care of that. How are we going to do that? We're going to come into this conditional, this if statement here, and ensure that the comparison that we have, the comparison that we have is only comparing lowercase strings, or rather lowercase characters. So we're going to use that. We could have used uppercases, so it wouldn't matter, but let's just use lowercase in this case. Oops, yeah, lower, what the hell, lowercase. So we're going to use lowercase for that, and also lowercase on this other side. So we're going to say to lowercase. So now we have that in this case. So I think we could, yeah, no, Prettier does it again, tries to make it look more prettier, yeah, more readable and all that. So let's just go back again to our code and check whether or not the code works now. And yes, it actually does. Now we have closing parentheses for both P's, which is correct, and opening parentheses for the other ones, since they only appear once, which is absolutely correct. So let's just go back to our problem statement, or rather just to check, to ensure that everything is okay. We said our parameters, we're taking it as a string, and we are returning a string. Yeah, there it is. We are not returning a string here. This is an array. So let's just check what could be wrong. Oh yeah, we didn't change this array. This is an array. We didn't change it back to a string. Remember, we split the string. We need to return the array that we have here into a string once again. So how do we go about doing that? Oh yeah, there is another there is a join method that we can use, which is essentially the opposite of split. So instead of splitting, you're literally just joining. So we're joining the characters. Once again, how do you want to join it without spaces in between? So you could insert in any other character in here, maybe an equal sign or even a hyphen or whatever, and it will join including that. So in this case, we don't want anything in between the characters, so no spacing. If you wanted spacing, we would have done that, but we don't need even spacing. We don't want any characters in between the characters, so join without spacing. So that's what we're gonna do, and we're gonna check whether or not what we are returning is now proper, and indeed it is proper. This is what we needed to return, which is a string containing the various characters, the opening and closing what is it, parentheses. So while reading this, of which there is a test case which we need to consider as well. We need to ensure that our code can do this. So let's just copy this and try it out in our, actually we need to go there in our code, that our code is able to deal with this. Let's just check. Does it? Yes, it does. It's able to read that, and it's able to output or return the right string. So I think we are good to go. So the next step that we're gonna do, once we have everything in order, is just copy that and finish the job. Let's go to our Codewars. Let's attempt this as a solution and see if it's gonna work. Let's test that. One, crossing fingers. Let's go. Boom. Nice. We have passed all the tests. That's brilliant. Okay, let's try to attempt it. When you try the attempt, that's where it starts testing for edge cases. So sometimes the code tends to fail here at this step because it goes more in depth, checking all the edge cases that could be happening. So let's just cross our fingers again, and we're lucky enough we get it right. Brilliant. Yep, I don't see what else I can change here. I think this is good enough. So we're gonna submit. Okay, so let's just go back to our code. So this is what we had. We just I would really encourage people to, or everyone to, learn prep. It helps a lot when it comes to solving these challenges. As you can see, I'm still learning it myself. I messed up in a few places, so I'm still messing up here and there as well. But with practice comes experience. So you eventually get the hang of it. So we just need to know what your parameters are. What are the return types? What are you returning? What is expected of you? What does the function expects to return? And then, can you give an example? Do you know example of what we're using a certain input and what the output is supposed to look like? So just a basic example. This is what is it? It's the simplest example that you can think of. Yeah, in these examples, you could possibly as well add edge cases. So perhaps what if the input string had a space in it? So what are you expected to return if that is the case, or or a space after? There's a white space after or white space before. What needs to happen? So things like that. Do you need to remove that space, or what needs to happen? Is it returning the right output? Yeah. So, and then you just need to construct the pseudocode. So the kind of logic, it guides you through the logic of what you need to do. So it has to be, in my case, it's usually just basic. I need to split the string. I needed to split the string into characters. Then I needed to map each character to one of these characters. How do I go about that? I need to check how many times the character appears in the string. In the string, if it is greater than 1, I need to return the closing parenthesis, or else if it is less than 1, if it is 1, essentially there's not going to be less than 1. If it is 1, we need to return this. More elegant by using ternary operators. I think that would have made it look more elegant, but nah, let's just leave it the way it looks. So, if and else statements, you can use ternary operators. They're also part of ES6. They're much more elegant than writing like this. Just it's gonna be a one-liner, which looks pretty good in your Codewars solution. But otherwise, this looks okay. So once again, I've been learning JavaScript for the past 4 months now, 3 to 4 months, and I've been doing coding challenges for about a month, and they've been super helpful in my JavaScript learning. So I would really encourage anybody else who is also learning JavaScript to jump into learning how to code using these challenges. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. This is my very first video that I've uploaded to YouTube. I don't have the best of equipment, so it probably doesn't sound the best. But what I'm going to try to do, I'm just going to try to improve, and in my next installments of videos. And yeah, if it was useful to you, please share the video and like the video. I don't know, even consider subscribing. Yeah, I don't know. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm hoping to see you in the next one. Cheers.